if your like entire like argument is that we should take this as true because the Old and New Testament say that it's true, then like we can say that Harry Potter is true because we have 8 books that say that it is true. So like if it's just the book, the only thing that stands behind the book is the fact that we believe that this book is true. It doesn't mean that it is true. It just means that we believe that it is so.
Very good. So thanks for asking the question. Why do I trust the New Testament Gospels to give me accurate historical information about Jesus of Nazareth? Great question. Because I have tests that I use on any document that claims to be historical.
Okay.
And I would love to hear your tests after I give you my tests.
Okay.
My tests are 4 in number. Internal consistency, meaning by that, are there contradictions within the text that point to massive confusion on the part of the author? No, when you read the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you have uniform and divergent details, which I love. Not contradicting each other, but different books containing different details, which smacks of authenticity on the part of the authors. I like that. Second test, literary style. Is the literary style of the document once upon a time in the land of Nod, or is the literary style at this time in this place with these people around, Jesus said this and did that? That is the literary style of the Gospels, historical narrative, eyewitness reportage. Third test, archaeology. Are we talking about Jesus floating a boat out to the island of Atlantis? No, sir. We're talking about Bethlehem, Nazareth, Sea of Galilee, Jerusalem, Rome. Are we talking about Mickey Mouse, Elmer Fudd and his cronies? No. We're talking about Pontius Pilate, Herod Agrippa, Tiberius Caesar, Caiaphas, Ananias. Historically verifiable individuals. Fourth test. Yeah, but the Gospels are almost 2,000 years old. What gives us any degree of certainty that we really have what the eyewitnesses wrote? Today, the Gospels that we have in English are based on over 5,000 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. The evidence is overwhelming.
So your evidence is internal consistency. So if I wrote a story with the correct tone, referencing real places, using without contradiction, and I got a whole bunch of my good friends to like write other stories about it, 200 years from now, that's going to be whatever. So those are your tests?
Those 4 tests: internal consistency, literary style, archaeological evidence, and manuscript evidence.
Okay, so what specific manuscripts like are we talking about?
The ones I just mentioned, over
Okay,
5,000 Greek manuscripts.
Okay, so these theoretical manuscripts that may exist say that Jesus rose from the dead because they said that, like, manuscripts of what? What are they manuscripting?
Manuscripts
History
of Matthew,
or...
Mark, Luke, and John.
Okay,
see, the
so
question is, do we have the eyewitness recounts kept accurately for today?
Okay, so we know that they kept them accurately because
Yeah.
they didn't just write a whole bunch of stories.
No, that's not the point I'm making.
Okay, so
the
please...
point I'm making is, how do we know 2,000 years after Christ that we have an accurate historical document? That was your question that I'm answering.
Yes.
We're not getting on all these tangents. You asked a very specific question. I'm answering it very specifically.
And I am very specifically taking down each one of your qualifications for why that is the case.
Literary style,
Right.
internal consistency,
Very right.
archaeology, and manuscript evidence. Those are my 4 tests.
Okay, so internal consistency, right? If we have internal consistency within any story, that would make it like a really good story. Is that correct? So if there's no contradictions inherent with the story, then like you have a great story. That's like the qualification of being a good story. Because if you read something and like, wow, this really contradicts what they said in the first book or whatever, you're like, this story sucks. So like, I could say probably that most good literature is internally consistent, regardless of its like historical accuracy or whatever. Number 2, for your archaeological is a hugely interpretive process. So like we could just find this and say, oh man, these hieroglyphs must mean this, but like that's not true. They didn't mean that. We think that they mean that because of our interpretation of what happened in history. We don't know that for sure. And I've been on your manuscript. Whenever you have these 5,000 manuscripts of whatever, it's not like there are copyright laws back then. What if they're just recounting a good story from the time? Like they're like, oh man, this would be great if this happened. So it's retelling of the same stories.
Okay, so now what are the tests that you use to determine historical reliability?
I don't. I think that most history probably isn't that reliable, which is why I'm always skeptical of things that I read. I don't believe them because I feel like the degree to which I can be certain is not enough for me to believe them.
Fair enough. Which means you don't know with any degree of certainty that George Washington was the first president of the United States.
Yeah.
You don't know that Napoleon fought the Battle of Waterloo.
Probably did. I can't say for any degree of certainty that I know that.
You don't know that there was a Nazi Holocaust.
Let's see. Okay. And then, okay.
How do you know
so
they're not lying?
Okay. So that is true, but the lying part could easily go for the lying argument could easily go for you. Number two, it's not just Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and then a whole bunch of people told a really cool story. It's all the accounts of the soldiers that were there and all these other people that were actually there that can actually give us recordings from the time period. And then, secondarily, I think that we often like fetishize the Bible to that degree. It's like, oh no, nobody can be wrong about this. This is so right. How can you dare like disagree with that? And I think that whenever we go about trying to test the validity of whether or not this is actually a historical document or not, is not critical enough. Because we say that there's 5,000 manuscripts, but we have not actually read these manuscripts. We don't know if these manuscripts are just like rehashing of the cool story that Matthew and the bros wrote.
It is my privilege to debate Muslim professors on university campuses.
Great.
I can promise you I would never look into the face of a Muslim and say, you know, the evidence is Muhammad never lived.
I mean, but
That is so naive. That is so dishonest intellectually.
Okay.
The overwhelming evidence is Muhammad lived. He was a real space-time person, and we have a very accurate presentation of Muhammad's beliefs in the Quran, which has been carefully preserved over the past 1,500 years.
Okay, number one, ad hominem attacks are like really low. Number two, especially with regards to calling me like naive. So let's not resort to that.
I didn't say that.
Okay.
I said I debate
Implication
Muslim
and rhetoric count.
professors.
Number two.
And if I were to say to a Muslim professor or any Muslim, I'm sorry, you don't have enough evidence that Muhammad really lived.
now you're
that
saying
shows
that
a
I
disrespect for all of the evidence that indeed Muhammad was an historical person.
Okay,
but
so
for
now
them it works though.
Pardon?
But for Muslim people, it works for them. So
No, that is not.
no.
That is
Okay,
not the
but
argument of my Muslim friends.
Okay, so you're saying that I can't disagree with you because
didn't
it'd
say
be
that
disrespectful to
I
disagree
said
with you?
that you have not produced yet for me a better set of tests that you use to determine historicity. And what I've heard you say instead was, you haven't answered my question about what are your tests that you use to determine historicity. Instead, you've said, I don't think we can know history. Fine. So I'm telling you, I totally disagree with you. I think historical knowledge is legitimate and valid. And when I debate Muslims, I'm not going to go at the angle of, well, you know, we can't know whether Muhammad really ever lived. No, the overwhelming historical evidence is Muhammad really lived. I disagree with the man, but to try and maintain that Muhammad never existed, because I don't have enough historical evidence, is intellectually dishonest. Because there's more than enough historical evidence that Muhammad was a real historical person. That's all I'm saying.
But from their perspective, it's true to them.
That's not the issue we're talking about.
But it does have, because your two eyeballs are perspectives.
Okay, that's great.
Two eyeballs are two different perspectives?
It is.
Okay, so for number one, I could use your test.
Yes.
It doesn't matter. So if I use your test, I can come up with something else that meets your definition of historicity.
I sure hope you can. You got a history department here. I sure hope you accept historical knowledge as a legitimate form of knowledge. You guys are paying a lot of money to take history courses.
Okay, but
you better not walk into your history class and say, you know, this is all bunk, because you can't know anything historically. That would be a little naive, I think.
So if we believe everything that we are presented in such a way that you define like as historicity, we then should believe that Washington was our god because he did something like insurmountable as whatever. I don't understand where you're drawing the. I don't understand where you're drawing the line at where you're supposed to be going.
George Washington never claimed to be God. He claimed to worship God.
Okay, so Jesus just claimed to be God.
Yeah, he did.
Okay, great. So if Jesus just claimed to be God, and we have no verifiable way to prove that such is the case.
Well, if he rose from the dead, don't you think that's solid evidence that he's not blowing smoke when he claims to be God?
I think that the fact that he raised from the dead is not verifiable. I'd say that I'd be really questionable of George Washington if he said that he raised from the dead too.
Well, so would I. Because the evidence is Washington died and stayed dead. Doctors tried to keep him alive, but they didn't succeed. Jesus Christ died, but 3 days later, he rose from the dead, and over a period of 40 days, over 500 people see him at different times in different places, risen from the dead. It's pretty impressive.
Okay.
And they died for it. They were martyred for it. And hypocrites and martyrs are not made of the same stuff. Hypocrites and martyrs are not made of the same stuff. These guys said, we saw Jesus risen from the dead, and they died for what they claimed to have seen.
Okay, great. That is fantastic.
I'm glad you believe that.
Even
Now go on with your faith in Christ.
Okay, so no. What I'm saying is that even by your own standards, it doesn't make any difference. Like, it does not make a single bit of difference. If you can't, like, even by your own test, can't verify the fact that it is a historical document, then that does not make any difference. With beyond reasonable doubt, and there is, like, reasonable doubt to be sure.
Oh, sure, I struggle with doubt. We all struggle with doubt. If you don't struggle with doubt, you're brain dead, probably. So everybody struggles with doubt. The question is, what do you do with your doubts? I hope you allow your doubts to motivate you to study more carefully, to question more deeply, to look at options. Now, I hear you saying, beyond reasonable doubt. Okay, so anybody who says to me, the reason I can't put my faith in Christ is because I can't see evidence beyond reasonable doubt that point to him being reliable, so I don't believe in him.
Okay.
Fine. Then please tell me, who or what are you living for? And then second question, what's the evidence that what you are living for is beyond reasonable doubt?